Jennifer Gordon, who's the managing editor and senior fellow at Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. Take it from here, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Akshat. It's great to see you again. And I truly enjoyed listening in on that last panel. So I want to say good morning to our audience in Abu Dhabi. And also thank you to our audience in North America who is still awake, and our audience in Europe who may have woken up just to listen. My name is Jennifer Gordon. I'm the managing editor of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center, and I'm also the senior fellow for nuclear energy policy. Over the last 2 years, the Global Energy Center has worked to become one of the leading centers of thought on the intersections between nuclear energy, national security, and international cooperation. Our belief in the diplomatic ties that are forged through civil nuclear energy cooperation is exemplified by the friendship between the US and the UAE. Last year, we celebrated from afar as the UAE brought the first of 4 reactors at the Baraka nuclear power plant online, and I am delighted to welcome our friend, His Excellency Mohamed Al-Hammadi, back to the Atlantic Council. And I look forward to hearing his insights into the UAE's nuclear energy program. But first, I am delighted to introduce the moderator of this panel, Dr. Shannon Bragg-Sitton, who is the lead for integrated energy systems at Idaho National Lab. Shannon is at the cutting edge of research into applications on nuclear reactors beyond electricity and into the production of hydrogen, industrial heat, and desalination. We cannot wait to hear from you and this panel of experts. Shannon, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that kind introduction. And welcome to everyone to this Atlantic Council Global Energy Forum, and specifically to this session on nuclear beyond power. As we all know, nuclear energy currently provides a significant fraction of our non-emitting electricity in the developed world. In this session, we will discuss the critical roles for nuclear energy in meeting demands for non-grid applications as well, such as industry and even transportation, sectors that are more difficult to abate. We'll focus today on opportunities for nuclear energy, utilizing both light water cooled as well as high temperature advanced reactor designs to support the heat and electricity demands in industrial processes, production of hydrogen without emission of carbon dioxide, as well as desalination for potable water production. The 2015 Paris Agreement established a goal to limit global temperature rise to less than 2 degrees Celsius. This aggressive goal demands immediate as well as aggressive action if we are going to be successful. A variety of low or zero carbon technologies can be employed in a variety of combinations to meet the growing energy demand, but several recent studies conducted by the International Energy Agency, academia, national laboratories, and nonprofit organizations as well indicate that without contribution from nuclear energy, the cost associated with achieving deep decarbonization targets increases significantly. And in each of these studies, the least cost portfolios consistently point to an important share for nuclear energy, and the magnitude of that share significantly grows as the cost for nuclear energy drops. Further, meeting decarbonization goals requires that we consider the full range of energy demands, not just electricity, and the array of energy generation technologies that we might call upon to meet these demands. Nuclear plants generate energy without co-production of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases. And the primary output from a nuclear plant is heat. And that heat is traditionally converted to electricity to provide reliable, affordable baseload electricity to the grid. However, we can also use that primary heat to directly support industrial demand or to produce process intermediates, such as hydrogen, that can be used to produce an array of consumer products, such as transportation fuels and other products, and can provide a greater operational efficiency by doing so, and more efficient utilization of the capital that's invested to build these plants, while also reducing emissions from these hard to decarbonize sectors of the economy. Using this heat directly and leveraging energy that may not be needed at all times to support grid demand also provides an additional revenue source to nuclear plants to support their long-term economic viability. So today's distinguished panel will begin to address the challenges and the opportunities for such broad utilization of nuclear energy. I want to thank my fellow panelists here for joining me today, and I'm looking forward to hearing each of your perspectives on this extremely important topic area. So as I've introduced, nuclear energy plays a key role in providing a large proportion of clean electricity across many countries in the world. As Jennifer mentioned, just last year, the United Arab Emirates became the latest country to generate clean electricity to power its grid using nuclear energy. Therefore, before we look to the future of nuclear energy, I would first like to ask His Excellency Mohamed Al-Hammadi, CEO of Emirates Nuclear Energy Corporation, to provide his perspective on how the UAE achieved this successful milestone. Your Excellency, what does this mean for the UAE as well as to the global nuclear industry as a whole?
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Jennifer. Also, it's a pleasure to join you here today from Abu Dhabi, the capital of the United Arab Emirates. And firstly, I would like to thank the Atlantic Council for this the energy team for arranging this important panel on a very important subject. And also, I'd like to thank the viewers and my colleagues, fellow panelists, for joining this debate today. As a nuclear professional, I would like to start with a safety moment, if I may, and invite everyone to follow the guidelines of the local and national health authorities to be safe from COVID, and available also to vaccinate so we can get over this pandemic as soon as possible. As you mentioned, Shannon, 2020 has a real game-changing year for the UAE. The nations took a giant leap in its efforts to generate clean baseload electricity, simultaneously reducing its carbon emissions. So if I may, Unit 1 was a landmark achievement for UAE. It's entered a new phase of a clean and abundant electricity, and also the greatest contribution to curb greenhouse emissions for the UAE's history. It is a giant leap for the UAE and the UAE electricity sector to drive electrification. So in March 2020 was the start of operation. July actually was also the startup of our reactor, and in August we've connected to the grid. So as of today, in December, our Unit 1 was 100% power to the grid. This means it is the single generator of a clean electricity for the UAE and also for the Middle East. By the way, it's 1,400 megawatts of clean electricity. So now looking forward, we are on the right path of success to meet climate change targets and the Paris Agreement targets. The third phase will be to continue developing the other units, Unit 2, 3, and 4, which is our all dovetailing Unit 1, 1 year apart. And once we are fully operational and its subsidiaries, we'll have the full power of our power plants, which will be equivalent to around 5,600 megawatts of electricity. That will drive the UAE electrification toward the cleaner, greener sources of energy. That also will save us around 21 million tons of CO2 emissions on an annual basis. And that's the giant leap I think the UAE will have from now until the 4 units are operational.
Thank you so much for that great overview. And that's really exciting to think about how much CO2 is abated by these new additions. And I think we're all excited to see how aggressively the UAE is moving forward with nuclear energy to support growing energy demands in a way that is non-emitting and sustainable. Next, I'd like to turn to Kirsty Gogan. Kirsty is managing partner of Lucid Catalyst, which is a specialized international consultancy that focuses on accelerating deployment of zero carbon technology options. Kirsty is also co-founder of Terrestrial, which is a nonprofit that works to develop strategies that fulfill the mission of both decarbonization while also achieving prosperity. Kirsty, Terrestrial and Lucid Catalyst recently released a report on hydrogen, identifying it as a missing link to achieving the goals that are set out in the Paris Climate Agreement. Can you summarize for us some of the key findings in that report and what you found with regard to the role of nuclear energy in that hydrogen production?
Yeah, thank you so much, Shannon. And thank you also to the Atlantic Council for inviting me to join this really distinguished panel. It's a great honor to be here. So, the first thing to say is that the world is really far off track when it comes to meeting the Paris Agreement goals that Shannon described in her opening remarks of limiting the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees by 2050. In fact, current projections, even those that include like a really vast expansion of renewables generation, still show that more than half of the world's energy will still be supplied by fossil fuels by 2050. All the mainstream projections are consistent from that point of view. And that corresponds to a really high risk of a 4-degree trajectory in which substantial areas of the planet will become uninhabitable. And all this while 3 billion people are still projected to lack access to electricity by 2050. So that's the kind of current status that we're in. So if we're going to address that, if we're going to sort of turn the tanker, bend the curve, we're going to need to increase access to zero carbon neutral and carbon negative fuel substitutes that can achieve price and performance parity with fossil fuels. And that's where hydrogen comes in. So large scale, low cost, clean hydrogen is of course the key ingredient that can enable the production of clean substitute fuels that can enable decarbonization of those really tough to abate sectors like aviation, like shipping, like cement production, like industry. However, in order for hydrogen to be a useful ingredient, in order to make those substitute fuels, it has to be both really, really cheap. It needs to, in fact, be competitive with cheap oil today. And we estimate that the target price for hydrogen is around 90 cents a kilogram. Now, current projections for renewables generated hydrogen don't expect to achieve those costs until around 2050. And we hope that they will and that they do. But we have 29 years. I used to say we have 30 years. Now I realize I have to update that to say we have 29 years to our target date of 2050. And we think there's opportunities to make some to gain some traction in the meantime. With renewables, price reductions are constrained by the low capacity factors, even though we do expect to see the capital cost for renewables to continue to fall. Interestingly, by contrast, even existing light water nuclear plants today, and indeed successful new builds, such as we've seen, of course, most recently in the UAE, could already deliver clean hydrogen for below $2 a kilogram if dedicated to hydrogen production. And a new generation of advanced modular reactors could achieve that target price of 90 cents a kilogram, potentially by 2030. Now, as Shannon was outlining, nuclear technology has really particular attributes that make it very well suited to the production of hydrogen. The combination of low-cost power, the production of heat and potentially high-temperature heat, as Shannon was describing, combined with the high capacity factors and a tiny land use footprint, that power density enable not only highly efficient and low-cost production of hydrogen, but also at a large enough scale to be relevant to global oil supplies, which is currently around 100 million barrels of oil per day, just to give you a sense. So to drive that massive increase in the production of clean hydrogen, it's going to be necessary to transform project delivery and deployment models. And this will require the same intensity of focus that we've seen in cost reduction, performance improvements, deployment rates that have enabled renewables to begin transforming the global electricity system. And our report outlines how steep, really near-term cost reduction could be achievable by shifting from a traditional construction-based approach to a high productivity product-based approach, moving into high productivity manufacturing environments such as world-class shipyards, or indeed bringing the factory to the project through the development of hydrogen gigafactories or next generation refineries that can be located on existing large coastal oil and gas refineries. So when we move from this sort of traditional approach to construction to high productivity manufacturing, this dramatically lowers the cost of the clean hydrogen and the synthetic fuel production. And we know that leading shipyards already have that really extensive manufacturing capacity and can already produce designed for purpose offshore production platforms. In this case, they'd be tailored for hydrogen production. And then, of course, the production of fuels, which is a transportable commodity with a global market, can really enable, frankly, a new 21st century business model for the oil and gas sectors. So rather than the sort of current choice that the oil and gas sectors are facing, which is business as usual or extinction, frankly, this really does open an entirely new business opportunity for the 21st century. And then the beauty of this, of course, is that the oil sector can leverage its existing industrial capability to continue to supply global fuels deliveries, except that the production and operations are actually transformed through a great deal more flexibility on location and scale of siting, as well as, importantly, control and certainty over production. Offshore deployment then even further increases siting opportunities, reduces costs, enables large-scale global production, by the 2030s and beyond. So the rapid achievement of low hydrogen costs through these innovative delivery models that we outline in our report, we conclude that we could really accelerate deep decarbonisation across parts of our economy, which frankly, right now, we do not have good answers for. By 2050, we could see low-cost clean hydrogen help to avoid really substantial global cumulative future carbon emissions from a very large fraction of otherwise locked in fossil fuels. And this, a program of this kind, you know, could put the world back onto that 1.5 or 2 degree pathway of the Paris Agreement goals. And that, Shannon, is why hydrogen is the missing link to a livable climate. Thanks.
Thank you, Kirsty. And for those of you who maybe have not read through the report that Kirsty just described, I strongly encourage you to go to the TerraPraxis website, download a copy. It is rich with information on this new approach to hydrogen production, new approach to manufacturing and deployment of these systems. I do want to encourage the audience to submit questions in the Q&A portion of the app for the meeting. We will get to those after we've gone through some of these openings, but I did want to place that reminder. We really want to hear what your questions are. Next in the program here, we will turn to Seth Grae. Seth is the president and CEO of Lightbridge Corporation. Lightbridge is developing advanced nuclear fuels and also authored the strategic plan for nuclear power for the UAE. Seth, Kirsty has done an excellent job clarifying the role of hydrogen as a part of our transition to cleaner energy systems. From your perspective, and with a particular focus on the UAE, how do you think light water reactors might contribute to meeting this need? Will we need new technologies such as advanced nuclear fuels for LWRs to really diversify their output to also include these important non-electric products, considering technical constraints as well as economics?
It's a pleasure to participate in this Atlantic Council event in Abu Dhabi, albeit virtually. The United Arab Emirates takes on and succeeds in bold projects. One example is the great success of ENAC under Mohamed's leadership in deploying the 4 reactors at Baraka, that I understand that when all 4 units are operating, will result in the UAE reducing its carbon footprint per capita by more than any other nation has ever achieved. The UAE has many of the key components necessary to become a regional and global leader in decarbonizing large, difficult to decarbonize sectors, as Kirsty said, by producing hydrogen for non-carbon fuels and fuel cells that can decarbonize areas such as aviation, ships at sea, heavy trucks, trains, and industrial processes, including cement and steel production. The resources in the UAE include ENAC's successful deployment of a nuclear power program, an excellent nuclear regulatory authority, and a national oil company with infrastructure that is already also needed and usable to deploy liquid fuels regionally and globally, some of which can be repurposed for no carbon liquid synthetic fuels. Kirsty has described a system needed to produce large quantities of hydrogen economically. A key will ultimately be producing the high temperatures needed to most effectively produce hydrogen. Nothing will be as feasible as nuclear reactors for doing that for some time, until well after we've made it or failed on preventing catastrophic climate change. During these few decades that we have left, nuclear is the only feasible way to meet this goal. High temperature commercial reactors can eventually be commercialized, but we need to start with current reactor technology. And we can boost those reactors' efficiency with advanced nuclear fuels. We can generate hydrogen right now with electricity instead of high temperatures using existing reactor technology and electrolysis. And these reactors can have a significant boost in efficiency using advanced fuel. And that's what Lightbridge is developing. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you very much, Seth. I agree with you. I think there's a lot that we can do with light water reactors, both current fleet as well as those that are just coming online to begin tackling this challenge. And it is truly remarkable how we can better utilize some of these systems. At this point, let's move to the role of emerging nuclear technologies that you did briefly refer to, Seth, as we look to meeting a broader array of energy demands. Simon Irish joins us today as the CEO of Terrestrial Energy, one of several companies that is working to develop advanced nuclear reactor concepts for what we all hope will be a near-term commercial deployment. Simon, how can advanced nuclear plant designs further expand the range of applications that nuclear can support? And what are the key elements to making these operations economically viable for Generation 4 reactors?
Well, Shannon, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to join my fellow panelists today and participate in this, what I think is a very important discussion, and to do so hosted in Abu Dhabi, given everything that ENIC has accomplished over the last 12 months. So congratulations to Mr. Al-Hammadi on the accomplishments of ENIC over the last several years, but particularly this year. So Shannon, with respect to your question, in terms of the applications of advanced nuclear power plants, what they can deliver to the market looking forward. I think they deliver with respect to three critical factors, which are important for non-traditional applications of nuclear power. The first one is to be right-sized. Conventional reactor technologies benefit and can benefit from the tremendous economies of scale that exist with all nuclear technologies, but particularly Generation 3 technologies, because those economies of scale are permitted at a grid level where a grid can supply a tremendous amount of power over a wide area. With respect to industrial applications that need hybrid applications, and those hybrid applications require thermal power and heat. Thermal power is not, cannot be transported by grid. Thermal power has to be supplied in situ or close to an industrial park that requires a substantial thermal load. And when you're looking even at some of the largest industrial applications that have a thermal load, for example, some of the largest petrochemical plants, you find very few, if any, above 500 to 1,000 megawatt thermal. So to have a small reactor, one that is somewhere from a thermal power that can generate thermal power between, let's say, 200, and 400, you're in the right spot for hybrid applications. You're in the right spot to provide a significant source of both heat and power to industrial facility. And so right sizing is important, and advanced nuclear power plants having different economics, have different sizing criteria and sizing drivers, are capable of sizing to meet that market demand. The second factor, which is critically important, is cost. The industrial sector that produces products for a global market operates under a fearsome competitive environment. The supply of grids of power into a grid at a national level is a function of domestic policy. It's a function of political choices being made by the ratepayers on those grids. In Germany, the average German ratepayer has accepted the cost consequences of the energy choices it has made. But by the same token, the German government has shielded German industry from the cost of those energy choices. German power to the household is twice that of France, but German industry does not pay that cost penalty. So advanced nuclear technologies have the ability to deliver heat and power at a price point that has the ability to economically service industry. And those technologies are able to deliver on that point because if you classify these advanced technologies as generation 4, while they're all very different technically, they share pretty much one thing in common. They operate at much higher temperatures. And operating at much higher temperature has two consequences that are so important, Shannon, with respect to the question you just answered. That, the first one is operating at a much higher temperature, you have the means of generating power at much higher thermal efficiency, 44% thermal efficiency. And by extension, with an increase in thermal efficiency, you have a commensurate increase in capital efficiency as well, and the ability to deliver power to industry, to that industrial facility that is cost competitive. And secondly, operating at much higher temperature, you have a heat quality that now becomes relevant to the thermal load for the industrial facility. Whilst it's difficult to get aggregated data, and Shannon, I think, given the research that you and your team have undertaken at Idaho, I'm sure you've got probably better data than I have on this, but the data point I have is that if you can supply a heat quality of greater than 550 degrees C, you cover pretty much just about the majority of thermal requirements at the industrial level. So these advanced reactor technologies, they involve very different technology choices, and then if you look at across the market, many different design choices as well. It's both technology and design choices. With those technology and design choices, you have the ability to deliver on those, what I believe are the three critical factors: right sizing, cost, and both heat and power. So I think that is the exciting opportunity for advanced nuclear, and why it gives it the ability to cover a much greater range of industrial applications, and not just on-grid power provision, although that will, I think, be a very, very important application of nuclear power going forward. So perhaps I'll pause there, Shannon, and turn it back to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Simon. I, for one, am anxiously awaiting deployment of these advanced reactors so that we can prove these cost points and demonstrate the production and utilization of both heat and power. And I want to see this happen alongside the other generation technologies that can also provide this clean energy that we all need so much. And I do want to thank you all for those opening remarks and for giving us such a great basis for starting our discussion today. Again, I'd like to encourage our audience to submit questions to the Q&A, and we will get to as many of them as we possibly can in our limited time. First, I'll go to a few questions that I have as some of those questions begin coming in. So Mohamed, I want to go back to what is happening in the UAE with these new plants coming online. We've covered that potential role of nuclear plants in producing hydrogen. And as the newest country to add nuclear energy to your grid, do you think that now is the right time to consider production of hydrogen at these plants? And as we think about that, why do you think nuclear energy is often omitted when we talk about clean or green hydrogen in the greater discourse?
So if I may, Shannon, just to give a quick brief on the potential of hydrogen and what would make it successful, specifically in the world, and also looking at the UAE. So as my colleague mentioned, today the light water reactor is designed to provide electricity for all parameters, and the future advanced reactors definitely will have a great potential in providing cheaper hydrogen. But if I may just talk about hydrogen for a few minutes here. Hydrogen's been there and over decades, and there was no success for it. So what would be the success factors for hydrogen, or green hydrogen specifically? I would put it in 3 buckets. First one is technically, hydrogen is a very dense energy. It's around 140 megajoule per kilogram, and that's almost 3 times the natural gas. It's about 200 times to the Tesla batteries, which is will make the hydrogen, makes it technically speaking also transportable. So it makes it a very dense energy that will solve big problem that we have today with the energy storage. So it is viable, technically speaking, and very, very, will be a great product to have. Secondly, what we've seen right now and globally, there's a lot of strong government supports politically. China, Europe, Japan, UAE just announced last week the hydrogen alliances, which is between Mobile, ADNOC, and ADQ. And that's a very bold move from the government to explore and be in the front end of that new opportunity. So technology plus pricing, that makes it more viable. Today, the evolution of the electrolysis is made more efficient, cheaper prices, 50%, by the way. There was decrease of the capital cost of those electrolysis in the last 5 years only. And in comparison, reminds me of 2006. We were sitting in Abu Dhabi evaluating, do we do nuclear? Do we go with renewable? And looking at photovoltaic in the last 10 years, it dropped from 40 cents per kilowatt hour to 1.6 cents per kilowatt hour. Dramatic cost reduction. And that's what made it viable. That's what even opened the door for private sector to immediately jump in and create business opportunities. And now we will see also in the aviation sector and the transportation, as I mentioned, electricity storage, cogeneration from gas plants. It is viable. And looking now specifically at the nuclear or the equation within the UAE, 4 years from today, we will have 25% of electricity generated by a clean and reliable source of nuclear power plants. We have renewable also in the UAE and is being installed. We have also the gas plants. So if you look at the UAE's mix of energies, it is the right ecosystem from economics point of view, the infrastructure we have here in the UAE, as Seth mentioned, and also the abundance of electricity that we will have. So we have a very, I would say, ripe environment for the exhaust to be successful, so the hydrogen to be successful. And I commend actually Kirsty and her team for the Lucid report. I've gone through it over the weekend. It's impressive reports, a lot of data, and looking at that and putting them through those buckets of 3 filters, it gives me confidence that looking back in the rear back mirror of 2006 and how we evaluated solar power plants and where are we today and how that became a great success. Looking at the hydrogen, exactly the same similar environment I see around me today. But we have to be realistic in our approach, and we have to take the short and medium and long-term approach in such development. And we look at the long-term planning. UAE has been very bullish when it comes to energy mix. Nuclear is a good example, renewable is a great example, and hydrogen also will be a great example down the road, taking it with the right steps, with the right approaches. Over to Shannon.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive answer. And I think you're right that the stars are aligning for hydrogen to truly grow in market share, and for green hydrogen produced by nuclear, produced by renewables using non-emitting processes is the way to go with that. I think there's a lot of opportunity space there, and cost reductions in the technologies will further accelerate that progress. Now, we do talk about hydrogen a lot because it is such a versatile energy carrier. It can be used for storage. It can be used for electricity production, to support transportation via fuel cells or synthetic fuels. Kirsty, I want to go back to you, and you talked a little bit about some of those hard to abate sectors like production of fuels for aviation. and utilization of existing infrastructure to support moving those fuels around, production of those fuels, utilization. Can you tell us a little bit more on how we might utilize existing infrastructure, perhaps in the UAE or elsewhere, to support the production of synthetic fuels using this clean hydrogen? And do you think there are any advantages to being a first mover in this arena?
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think it's really important, given the scale and the timescales that we're dealing with to achieve the clean energy transition, that we de-risk our pathways as much as possible. And so the more that we can repurpose and use existing infrastructure, both in terms of engines in airplanes and ships, as well as our transport, distribution and production infrastructure, the better, frankly, because that will ultimately mean that there's a lower amount of investment that's required to enable the clean energy transition, but it also de-risks the sequencing that would be required to achieve that scale of change. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, we really focus on targeting very low cost hydrogen as an ingredient for drop-in substitute fuels, such as ammonia that could be used in marine applications, and indeed synthetic hydrocarbons that could be used in aviation, two really tough to abate sectors. And I think, as you know, as we've been hearing, there really is a tremendous opportunity to initiate this effort in the UAE. Actually, a kind of a unique opportunity, one might argue. You know, we have the sort of established world-class nuclear organizational infrastructure, culture, skills, supply chain to license, build, maintain, and operate nuclear plants. And I would like to add my congratulations to Mr. Al-Hammadi. We've really actually studied the success at Barakah extremely closely, and we're doing our best to transfer the learnings from every aspect of that program into Europe and the United States. So we're really big fans. But interestingly, in the UAE, the technology configurations, the industrial scale, and the commodities-based delivery and deployment models that will be required to deliver hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels at scale are actually more akin to the oil and gas industry than to today's nuclear industry. So we're really talking about moving from electricity to commodities based markets. And so the fact that the UAE also already is a world-class supplier in the production, processing, storage, transport and distribution of liquid fuels for global markets is highly relevant. And then I think one of the kind of key features, if I may, that I perceive here is a strategic intent, which I think is almost unparalleled actually in the world. So if we think about the gigafactory, the refinery scale delivery model, which has its highly integrated, high productivity on-site manufacture, assembly and installation of key components with a compact layout that can deliver very low cost hydrogen, the UAE appears to be almost uniquely placed actually to develop that kind of refinery scale facility, because that would really require assembling the capability in terms of nuclear capability, perhaps shipbuilding and manufacturing capability, chemicals, oil and gas, to operate, design and then deliver those assets, combined with financing capability. This really represents just huge potential to establish world-leading domestic supply chain capability with the competitive export of synthetic fuels, and the decarbonization that's required to sustain really important domestic as well as global parts of our economy, like aviation, construction and shipping. So we see like an opportunity to really leverage these capabilities to gain very considerable first mover advantage that will enable, you know, the transformation of domestic industries, like becoming the world's first carbon negative airline, for example. I would book a flight, whilst also, you know, meeting the rising global demand that Shannon is highlighting for very, very low cost hydrogen on global markets.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. I think being a first mover in something like this could be a really exciting opportunity. And I think you're right that a lot of that the capability is there. There's the right pieces of the puzzle that can come together and really provide an excellent example for other implementations globally. Seth, I know you've spent time in the UAE. What are your thoughts? Do you want to add to this? If the UAE were to become a global synthetic fuel provider, what technologies might be available for achieving this?
Well, I was very glad to hear everything that Mohamed said, and he's the real leader in these areas. And as you know, the UAE currently utilizes light water reactor technology. And I think the UAE should start exploring light water technology to generate electricity to produce hydrogen through electrolysis. This light water reactor technology is also what the UAE's nuclear regulator is best prepared to license in the near term. Producing hydrogen with nuclear power could, as Mohamed said, perhaps start ultimately with one of the units at Baraka, perhaps to be used for demonstration purposes, but that power is already needed. As Mohamed said, it will provide about 25% of all of the electricity for the nation. I don't really see the units at Baraka as being ultimately used to generate a great amount of hydrogen. That electricity is spoken for in a sense. So new light water small modular reactors could be deployed as dedicated units to generate electricity needed to produce hydrogen. In time, these small light water reactors could potentially be replaced with advanced reactors that produce higher temperature heat, even better suited for hydrogen generation, such as reactors that Simon's company is developing. In the meantime, I feel heartened that I think the UAE is seriously starting to consider looking into producing hydrogen with current light water reactor technology. And I think a next step would be to boost that with advanced fuels. At Lightbridge, we're working toward proving that our fuel can provide a 30% power uprate in new build reactors, large and small. And we're trying to position Lightbridge to be an essential company to prevent catastrophic climate change. We think the increased power from reactors using this type of fuel can make it feasible to produce synthetic no carbon fuels using the existing reactor technology as a key step toward leading to the use of advanced reactors ultimately.
Thank you, Seth. And I want to go back and comment on part of your answer in looking at focused small modular reactors to potentially produce electricity for low temperature electrolysis. I think that's a great path. We're beginning to demonstrate that technology at some of the existing current fleet light water reactors in the US. But I'll also note that we are working to utilize lower temperature light water reactors for high temperature electrolysis through heat augmentation. So thermally integrating those reactors, those plants with high temperature steam electrolysis and augmenting those temperatures so that we can get to the temperatures necessary for the more efficient steam electrolysis. So I like that plan. I'll push it to even get to higher efficiencies, while we then push to get those advanced high temperature reactors into the marketplace as well. And on that note, I want to turn to Simon, because Simon's trying to get some of those high temperature advanced reactors commercially available. And a question came in from the audience that I thought was very interesting. So we've seen, as we go through COVID-19, we're all experiencing this globally, we have seen coordination and rapid development, regulatory approval and deployment of COVID vaccines. So from that context, when we're thinking about new nuclear technology and getting to the final stages of certification and all the critical issues associated with that, is there any prospect to accelerating the certification and the rollout of advanced nuclear technologies, bringing into that mindset some of what we've learned this last year about how rapidly we can come together and move things forward? Simon.
Well, Shannon, I think from a regulatory perspective, there's a lot of work has been done over the last 5 years by regulators, both working with domestic focus groups, but working internationally as well to take lessons learnt and strategies to improve the efficiency of licensing advanced reactors and sharing them in the international community of regulators. There's a program that the US NRC and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission put in place last year to focus on advanced reactors and focus on specific designs. This is not a program dealing with a hypothetical advanced reactor. The regulators wanted to work specifically on an actual design that was being deployed. So a lot of work is in play at the moment to ensure that those licensing frameworks and those licensing protocols are appropriate for advanced reactor designs. If you go back, 5 years, I think maybe 6 years, as a developer, you could be perhaps concerned that the licensing strategy was not sufficiently clear in cost and time to support the commercial activities of a private developer of an advanced reactor. But the last 5 years, you've seen very, very encouraging development. And if you look at the market today, the proof point here is if you look at the number of advanced reactor developers that are now engaged with in pre-application discussions with the US NRC and also in the vendor design review process with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. There's at last count, I think there were 12 advanced reactor developers that were now engaged with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. So at this point, I think sufficient, that's very significant and quite impressive progress has been made already in the regulatory community to support the timely deployment of these important nuclear innovations.
So given that that regulatory process and your good explanation of what is going on there and some really encouraging prospects, what do you think is the biggest obstacle at this point to commercial deployment of these innovative technologies?
Well, innovation in any industrial sector is a challenge. I just returned to a comment that Mr. Hammadi made perhaps 15 minutes ago, referring to where the solar sector was in 2004. It would be quite interesting and is interesting to review what the common sentiment in the business press was over the commercial feasibility of solar in 2004, 2005. Many people did not appreciate that the first data points from the first solar plants were not indicative of the capabilities of broad deployment of those technologies. So solar today is benefiting from true innovation, where that innovation was laid down by those that had disruptive business models, disruptive technologies, and that innovation was laid down in 2003, 2004. But I don't think there are many people today that would question that the nuclear industry, that the solar industry has done very well today on delivering on its innovation promise. And that's true. That's true with respect to innovation in the nuclear industry. Yes, there are those that say that innovation in the nuclear sector is not needed. Innovation in every sector is needed. The nuclear industry does not operate in a outside of the commercial pressures of delivering industrial heat and power in a globally competitive market. It exists very much in that market, and it is subject very much to those pressures. The nuclear industry today is competing against the natural gas industry that has done very well again. Another industry that has embraced in the last 20 years, embraced innovation and delivered really a transformative product. Natural gas, certainly in North America, natural gas, whilst it may still be a volatile commodity, it has its equilibrium price point is materially lower, a lot lower than it was in the last compared to 10 years ago. So that the nuclear industry, has the capability of delivering true transformative nuclear innovation. And those true transformative nuclear innovations will be associated with different technology choices. I argue that those technology choices, one critical technology choice, will be from a generation 4 reactor system, one that operates hot, achieving high thermal efficiency, 44% thermal efficiency, and one that expands considerably the industrial capabilities of a nuclear power plant. So that is the innovation opportunity for nuclear today.
I think you're absolutely correct that any of these sectors, no matter what the sector is, there's always room for innovation and advancement. If we sit still and don't continue to innovate, we will miss so many opportunities. I always like to talk about if we look at an existing fleet light water reactor, from the outside, it may not look like it has changed much, but it has changed dramatically on the inside, whether that be improvements on the fuel performance or upgrading of the control systems to digital control rooms. We continuously innovate, and we need to do so on a grander scale to achieve these grand missions and goals that we have set out in front of us. Kirsty, do you have a comment?
Just a brief comment, just to say, I really agree. And Shannon, the work that you're doing in your lab is sort of leading on so many fronts, demonstrating the value proposition in many different applications for nuclear technology, which have been really underappreciated, I think, and are now really starting to come to light as we confront some of these harder to decarbonize sectors and the real contribution that these technologies could potentially make. So that's incredibly important for sort of mobilizing effort and resources around commercializing and realizing that potential. So that value proposition is absolutely critical. But I also think that innovation in business models and delivery and deployment models is really important if we're going to achieve the scale and the costs that are required. And, we haven't, as Simon said, applied our sort of creativity and intent to achieving those innovations as we have seen successfully applied in other sectors, like in the renewables industry. So it's ripe, and it's really there for the taking.
Thank you, Kirsty. And you led perfectly into the next question I wanted to answer, or to ask the panel, and this goes to anyone. So yes, disruptive business models are a part of it, disruptive technologies. What about the policy landscape as we shift from the predominant thinking of nuclear to support electricity, as we change that discourse to nuclear beyond power and moving toward the industrial application side? Do you think the policy landscape will change? Does it need to change? And what might we help those changes be put in place? I put that out there for anyone. Yes, please, Mohamed.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. So if I may, the saying goes, necessity is the mother of innovation. And today, with having renewable as intermittent source of energy, having nuclear as a base load that runs 24/7 for 18 months and 24-month cycle, that abundance of electricity, and also with the intermittency renewable, it creates that need for such kind of a storage or a fuel that emits only water, by the way. And that will be a major contributor to climate change solution. And today, if you have something technically viable, commercially viable, politically or policies normally will align. And because it's necessary, it's required, and there's not much of alternatives are available there. So that's my take on your question. And today UAE is pursuing renewable, nuclear. We have abundance of gas, and we have all the right success recipes for that. And the government support forming the I would call it the strategic hydrogen alliances between 3 major companies, the Mubadala, ADNOC, and ADQ. We have the right synergies. And today, UAE is, people are looking at the moon, we're gazing at the stars today. So we are ambitiously pursuing this opportunity, this golden opportunity, I would say. Over to you, Shannon.
I'm glad you're pursuing that golden opportunity, and we hope that others will do so as well. The other panelists, do any of you have thoughts on these policy landscapes? We're sitting in many different regions and perhaps have some different thoughts on that matter.
Well,
Simon.
Yes, Shannon, I'll just comment on policy support. The opportunity certainly for advanced reactors is to find a like-minded industrial partner that perhaps is in the chemical or petrochemical sector that would be motivated to develop the linking technologies to adapt their chemical engineering processes, and in fact even adopt new chemical processes that may be at a TRL level of 4, 5, 6. I'm thinking of certain other methods of creating hydrogen from natural gas, one of which is pyrolysis. The beauty of that is that you create hydrogen. The carbon byproduct is not in gaseous form, which is a bit more challenging for CCS to sequester. It's in the form of black carbon, solid carbon. There are many technologies, I think maybe 6 or 8 of them that have been, demonstrated at various scales, lab scale, maybe slightly larger prototype scale over the last 10 years. From a government policy perspective, encouraging the policy to encourage that industrial partner to embrace that innovation, which is the other half of nuclear innovation. Someone that wants to develop their industrial processes to marry, to link to the heat and power of an advanced reactor. I think that's an important part of the equation to make some of these technologies work.
I couldn't agree more. I think that designing these processes to better link between the energy provider and the energy user is so critical to achieving an optimal configuration. And we have a lot of that work going on in the national laboratories, trying to bring the TRL up for those different technologies. Seth, I think you had something you wanted to add on this, this discussion point as well.
Well, from an American perspective, we've seen very encouraging bipartisan support for nuclear power. In all 4 years of the Trump administration, there was very strong support for nuclear, but the R&D budgets were actually increased in both the Democratically and Republican-controlled House and Senate all 4 of those years above what the administration requested. And I think we're going to see that now continuing into the future, including the great programs going on at Idaho National Lab.
Kirsty, I can...
One
Yes.
quick comment, which is, I think that to really move the dial on this, we need courageousness and we need decisiveness. And those are 2 important assets that I see in the UAE that could really provide the leadership that's needed on this issue to demonstrate this potential. So that's my final call to action.
Well, it's an excellent note to close on. I think it does require someone who's courageous enough to get outside the box, to change the paradigm and show that it can be changed and it can be effective and successful. So I thank you in the UAE for doing that, for being a forward thinker in these energy applications. And I thank all of you for your contributions in that forward thinking on how we can better implement clean energy technologies, how we can better utilize the vast amounts of energy that is available to us in our nuclear plants and move forward alongside those other generation technologies. So I see that our time has counted down. I want to just give a very brief opportunity to each of you, if you would like to make just a 10-second closing remark before we go back to Jennifer. Mohamed, I'll go to you first.
Thank you, Shannon. That was a very interesting panel discussion, and I learned a few things here and there. I'm really thankful to the Atlantic Council, and this is a call for saving the environment. UAE is doing its utmost efforts, from the nuclear program, renewable, and the opportunities that UAE is capitalizing on. So I look forward 10 years today, and what will be the story that we'll be talking about from energy innovation and how we've managed to create a dent, in our environment saving equation. Thank you.
Thank you. Kirsty, any closing remarks?
I thought I'd squeezed in mine with my courageousness and decisiveness, but I will add that the untapped potential here that we've been talking about with regards to hydrogen, you know, actually the potential for nuclear technology to be applied to many of our really big challenges like direct air capture, desalination, and other applications that could really support not only our climate mitigation goals and so on, but actually increase quality of life for many people around the world as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing more leadership in these areas.
Thank you, Kirsty. And Seth?
Well, I think we've had a bit of a sugar high of some of the easier to decarbonize areas moving fast, such as going from coal to natural gas. And now we're starting to hit the hard areas to decarbonize, and massive hydrogen production in a clean way economically may prove to be the only way to decarbonize some of these areas.
I agree. And Simon, I guess you get the last words here.
I think the hydrogen discussion is particularly interesting. That is the golden key to a totally decarbonized energy future, and the ability for nuclear to be one of those clean energy sources with tremendous clean energy muscle to turn that key is tremendous. But it does require further innovation. There are many different ways to create hydrogen.
Thank you. And I think this discussion really has clarified some of the significant potential for nuclear energy to contribute to meeting both our current as well as our future energy demands in a manner that is reliable, sustainable, affordable, and also helps us to reduce our climate impacts. I do think we have an exciting future, and I'm happy to be working with people like you that are out there and moving things forward. So thank you to all of you for your time today and your insightful remarks. And at this time, I'd like to hand it back to Jennifer Gordon of the Atlantic Council to make some remarks on the sessions that will be coming later.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon. Just a fantastic, wonderful panel. Really appreciated it. It was fascinating to listen to. So again, I want to thank Dr. Shannon Bragg-Sitton for moderating, and our panelists, Kirsty Gogan, Seth Grae, Simon Irish, and His Excellency Mohamed Al-Hammadi. This was really, truly outstanding. And, you know, it's what I believe the future of nuclear energy panels are going to look like as we start to succeed in our efforts to decarbonize the power system, and we become more ambitious as we move into decarbonizing the harder to abate sectors. So I'd like to thank you all for attending the first day of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Forum. We'll be back in just a few hours to end the day in East Asia with our next panel at 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Asia's Role in the Energy Transition, co-hosted with Singapore International Energy Week. We will then, starting in the morning in DC, we will offer a full slate of programming to put the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden into context. Our first inauguration panel, America and the World, Energy and Security, starts at 10 a.m. Eastern, and it features a conversation with Halima Croft, Managing Director and Global Head of Commodity Strategy at RBC Capital Markets, Megan O'Sullivan of the Harvard Kennedy School and former Deputy National Security Advisor on Iraq and Afghanistan, and General David Petraeus, Chairman of KKR Global Institute and former Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. This panel will be moderated by Andrew Solinger, Publisher of Foreign Policy. We will then be live streaming a feed of the inauguration itself starting at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Atlantic Council President and CEO, Fred Kemp, and Capricia Marshall, who is the Atlantic Council's Ambassador in Residence and Senior Advisor to the Adrian Arsht Latin America Center Advisory Council, will both provide commentary as we watch the inauguration. I cannot wait to hear insights from both Fred and Capricia as we watch what is sure to be an inauguration unlike anything we've ever seen before at this unprecedented time. Finally, we'll host a panel starting at 1:30 p.m. Eastern called Fast Thinking: Views of the Inauguration from Around the World. This panel will feature rapid responses to the inauguration from former Prime Minister Carl Bildt of Sweden, Atlantic Council Vice Chair Stephen Hadley, former Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain, Ana Palacio, and the retired Honorable Lord George Robertson. This panel will also be moderated by Fred Kemp. Then we'll have another full day of programming, and I hope that you can join us. So again, thank you to our audience and to everyone who played such a great part in making day one of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Forum a fantastic success.